On the morning of December 7, 1941, while black smoke still clawed upward from the burning wreckage of Pearl Harbor and the nation's understanding of war shattered in real time, Marine Reserve Captain Melvin Johnson Jr. stood in a congressional hearing room in Washington holding a roll of blueprints that he believed could change the way Americans fought and survived the coming conflict. A quiet Boston lawyer at only 34 years old, facing a wall of uniforms and skepticism as he presented a weapon the Army had already decided was impossible. A light machine gun weighing barely 13 pounds that fired the same powerful .30-06 cartridge as the Browning automatic rifle, yet could be broken down into a compact 23-inch package for paratroopers and raiders operating deep behind enemy lines, a weapon that seemed to belong to a future the Army was not ready to imagine. With its curved 20-round side-mounted magazine, its rotating bolt that looked more like aircraft engineering than infantry hardware, and its revolutionary ability to be reloaded with standard 5-round rifle clips when magazines ran dry, a design that on paper promised something no American weapon had yet delivered, the firepower of a machine gun team carried and wielded by a single man moving with the speed of a rifleman. Army ordnance officers examined the sleek 42-inch weapon, timed its steady 450-round-per-minute rate of fire, watched Johnson field strip it in seconds on a hearing room table, and then dismissed it with bureaucratic finality, calling it too complex, too fragile, too unconventional for mass production, insisting that wartime survival depended on standardization rather than innovation, and shelving the Johnson light machine gun as yet another clever idea that had no place in a military preparing to fight an industrial war by familiar rules. But while the brass in Washington returned to their procurement charts and production schedules, Marines training for the coming nightmare of Pacific Island warfare were already asking a different question, one born not of doctrine but of experience. What if lighter and faster could kill more efficiently than heavy and slow? 6 months later, 87 Johnson light machine guns arrived quietly at Camp Pendleton in wooden crates originally stamped for foreign delivery. Weapons the Army had rejected now finding their way into the hands of Marine paratroopers and raiders who understood that jungle war would not be won by standing still behind heavy guns, but by moving, striking, and vanishing before the enemy could respond. After Pearl Harbor obliterated America's peacetime illusions, the Marine Corps faced realities the Ordnance Department could never fully grasp from Washington offices, because Marines knew they would soon be fighting in suffocating jungle where visibility collapsed to yards, where humidity rotted metal and flesh alike, and where the 19.5-pound bar, loaded and crew-served, turned every automatic weapons position into a stationary beacon for Japanese snipers and mortars. The bar demanded a two-man team, a fixed firing position, and time, luxuries that did not exist in jungle warfare, and its distinctive sound often brought enemy fire down within minutes. Marine leaders like James Roosevelt and Evans Carlson understood that traditional infantry doctrine would fail in terrain where movement itself was survival, and the Johnson arrived not through official endorsement but through a bureaucratic accident that bordered on fate. As hundreds of guns ordered by the Netherlands Purchasing Commission for colonial forces in the Dutch East Indies were stranded in American warehouses after Japan's conquest made delivery impossible. Marine procurement officers quietly claimed 87 of these orphaned weapons, and when they were opened at Camp Pendleton in early 1942, Marines like Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien discovered something fundamentally different from anything they had trained with. A gun whose side-mounted magazine allowed firing flat to the ground without digging into dirt, whose recoil-operated action ran clean where gas systems fouled, and whose barrel and receiver could be separated in seconds for airborne operations or rapid movement through dense terrain. During training exercises that simulated jungle combat, Johnson armed Marines outmaneuvered bar teams repeatedly, moving like riflemen yet delivering suppressive fire wherever needed, setting up and breaking contact before traditional gunners could even reposition, and when ammunition ran low the Johnson revealed another advantage the Army had dismissed on paper, as its magazines could be topped off with standard rifle clips without removal, a feature that would later mean survival when supply lines collapsed. Amphibious training revealed still another advantage, as Johnson guns dunked in surf, shaken free of water, and fired immediately while gas-operated weapons seized and corroded, and although critics pointed to real shortcomings, the unbalanced feel of the side magazine, the scarcity of spare magazines, the fear that light construction meant fragility, elite units specifically requested Johnsons as deployment approached, praising their reliability, ease of maintenance, and the way a single Marine could carry automatic firepower without the logistical burden of a crew-served weapon. When the Marines landed on Guadalcanal in August 1942, the Johnson's true test began not in dramatic beach assaults, but in the exhausting patrols through jungle so dense that sound traveled farther than sight, where traditional doctrine broke down and individual initiative replaced coordination, and in these conditions Johnson-armed Marines discovered they could move independently, each man capable of suppressive fire without waiting for a gun team to set up. During early engagements along the Illa River, Johnson gunners maintained fire by clip loading under pressure, covering flanking movements that would have stalled entirely with a bar, and during the desperate night battles for Henderson Field, Johnson squads redeployed rapidly to threatened sectors, opening fire within seconds rather than minutes, shifting positions before mortars could zero in, and breaking Japanese charges through mobility rather than sheer volume. The weapon's reliability under mud, rain, and salt became legendary, functioning after immersion and neglect that disabled other guns, yet its weaknesses emerged as well, as prolonged night assaults drained 20-round magazines too quickly, spare magazines vanished through loss and damage, and side-mounted feeds snagged on vines that could rip magazines loose at the worst moments. Logistics, not combat performance, became the Johnson's greatest enemy, and by late 1942 many Marines relied almost entirely on clip loading, reducing sustained fire but preserving automatic capability when nothing else would function. Even so, Johnson-equipped units demonstrated unprecedented flexibility, spreading across wider fronts, pursuing retreating enemies for days, and sowing confusion among Japanese forces who struggled to identify firing positions that shifted constantly, a psychological advantage as powerful as the weapon itself. As the campaign moved to Bougainvillea, the remaining Johnsons were refined by experience, stripped of bipods, wrapped against vegetation, and used by Marines who had learned exactly how much firepower could be delivered before moving again, and in battles like Piva Forks and Cape Torquemada, Johnson squads defeated larger enemy forces by refusing to fight from fixed positions, maintaining pressure through constant movement and point-blank automatic fire. Extended patrols behind enemy lines proved the weapon's unique reloading system indispensable when resupply was impossible, sustaining automatic fire where traditional guns would have fallen silent, and though magazine springs degraded in the tropical environment and required constant attention, the Johnson's core mechanism continued to function when others failed. By 1944, despite proven effectiveness, combat attrition and supply failures reduced Johnson numbers to a fraction of their original issue, yet their influence spread beyond the Pacific as the 1st Special Service Force carried the weapon into the mountains of Italy, where its ability to be broken down and carried by individual soldiers made it ideal for night climbs and alpine assaults impossible for crew-served guns. On peaks like Monte la Difensa, Johnson gunners provided point-blank suppressive fire against entrenched German positions under freezing conditions that disabled other weapons, firing magazine after magazine, then clip-loading to maintain pressure until enemy defenses collapsed, and in operations from Anzio to southern France, the Johnson proved that automatic fire could move with the assault rather than lag behind it. Even there, fine dust exposed weaknesses in magazine springs and maintenance demands, yet after-action reports consistently credited the weapon with higher mission success rates and lower casualties, validating Melvin Johnson's original belief that individual mobility combined with automatic fire could reshape small-unit combat. Still, as victory approached, the same institutional logic that had rejected the Johnson ensured its disappearance. As standardization and logistics outweighed battlefield performance, spare magazines vanished from supply chains, and proven weapons were abandoned not because they failed soldiers, but because they did not fit peacetime systems. By 1945, Johnson light machine guns were rare curiosities scattered among specialist units, and Marines who had relied on them returned reluctantly to heavier doctrine, feeling the loss of flexibility firsthand. Post-war demobilization erased the Johnson almost entirely from American service, yet its legacy endured in the tactics it inspired, the doctrine it quietly reshaped, and the lesson it left behind, that innovation proven in blood can still be defeated by bureaucracy, and that sometimes the weapons that save lives in war are remembered not for how widely they were issued, but for how fiercely they were fought for by the men who carried them.